Welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts, where we always break down all that fun new stuff in AI research. And today we're going to be diving into a paper that's been kind of making waves in the AI community. It's called Idiosyncrasies in Large Language Models. So for those of you just tuning in and maybe want the quick version, here's the TLDR. And for a minute, researchers, they wanted to see, could they train a model to actually figure out which large language model generated a piece of text. Kind of like, a fingerprint, but for AI-generated content, right?
Yeah, like a stylistic fingerprint.
Exactly. And guess what? They actually got insanely high accuracy, sometimes, over 27%. So it really does seem like each LLM kind of have its own, unique style. It's not just about the words it chooses. They look at all sorts of stuff from word frequencies to how LLMs prefer to use Markdown. Do they bold text in a list, for example? And this obviously has, pretty big implications for folks who are working on, detecting AI-generated content, or even, understanding what's the impact of synthetic data when we're training these models. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal. But for everybody else, let's unpack this a bit further, right? So the researchers, they designed some really clever experiments to kind of, dig into all these LLM idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is they started by prompting a whole bunch of different LLMs, all with the same set of prompts, right? We're talking different families here, like ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, Gemini, DeepSeek, even Llama, Gemma, Q, Mistral, the whole gang's here. They even looked at different sizes within the same model family.
Oh, wow. So they really were trying to cover all their bases.
Yeah, get a good, representative sample.
Makes sense. And so then that's when the real fun begins, right? They trained this classifier on all those different outputs. It's basically they were teaching it to be an LLM detective, to sniff out all those subtle little differences.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they were giving it a magnifying glass and saying, go find the clues.
Exactly.
And the results were, well, remarkable, honestly. This classifier could actually tell which LLM wrote what with an accuracy that, I'll be honest, it kind of blew me away.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, for example, it could distinguish between ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, Gemini, and DeepSeek with over 97% accuracy. I mean, come on, that's wild. It's like, being able to tell who wrote a note just by how they, dot their I's and cross their T's. But for AI...
Yeah, it really is. And here's the thing. They found these unique fingerprints, not just across, different LLM families, which you might expect, but even within the same family.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, so even different sizes of, say, the Qwen 2.5 model, they still had their own little quirks and stylistic choices. And this kind of suggests that these choices are baked in, it's not just some surface level variation.
So it's not just about the architecture of the model or the data it was trained on. There's something, deeper going on here. It's almost like each LLM develops its own personality, a unique voice, through that learning process.
That's a great way to put it, yeah, like a personality.
It's wild.
And to really test this classifier, they wanted to see, okay, can we hide these fingerprints? So they tried all sorts of things, playing with response length, formatting, even, prompt engineering techniques.
Oh, interesting. So they were basically trying to give these LLMs a disguise, right?
Exactly.
Trying to make them harder to identify.
Yeah, could we fool the detective?
Did it work?
Not really. It was incredibly robust, this classifier. It still performed remarkably well.
Huh. So even with all those tricks, it could still tell which LLM was which.
Yeah, which really points to the fact that these patterns, they're not just superficial.
Okay, so if prompt engineering can't erase those fingerprints, where are they hiding, right? So the researchers, they had to go deeper. They started examining smaller and smaller chunks of text, trying to figure out, okay, how much information does this classifier actually need to make a correct ID?
And get this, even a single token, the very first word an LLM chose, that was enough to get around 50% accuracy.
Wow. So the LLM is basically revealing its identity right from the get-go. First word choice, super important it seems. But is that the whole story?
Well, that's what they wanted to find out.
Right.
So they started digging into, the specific words and phrases each LLM preferred, looking for any patterns that went beyond just, random chance.
Okay, so they weren't just looking at individual words in isolation, but how those words were being combined. Almost like looking for an LLM's, catch phrases.
Exactly. Are there certain phrases that are way more common in, say, ChatGPT's outputs versus Claude's? And if so, what does that tell us about their underlying, stylistic differences?
Makes sense.
And they did find some interesting patterns.
Like what? Give us some examples. I'm dying to know what these AI catchphrases are.
Well, they found that ChatGPT, for instance, it tends to use phrases like such as or certainly quite a lot, along with words like overall and typically. It's almost like it's aiming for like a more comprehensive, nuanced tone in its responses.
Interesting. So ChatGPT is the verbose one, huh? What about the others?
Well, Claude, on the other hand, it was more likely to use phrases like based on or here's a summary, which, kind of reinforces its tendency towards that more like concise and direct communication style.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. It's like Claude's all business while ChatGPT likes to, chat. Ha ha, I love it. And they did this with like a bunch of different LLMs, right?
Yeah, lots of them.
Did they see similar patterns with those as well?
Absolutely. Like they found that Llama, for example, which is an open weight Instruct LLM, meaning it's, trained specifically to be good at following instructions. It frequently used phrases like including and such as, much like ChatGPT.
Huh. So it seems like certain training approaches, right, might actually lead to similar stylistic tendencies, but there must be some variation, right?
Oh, definitely. Take Gemma, for example, another Instruct LLM. They found that it often starts its responses with phrases like let me or no if, almost like it's trying to be, extra helpful and engage with the user more directly.
Fascinating. It really does seem like these LLMs are developing unique personalities through their training. But, word choice can't be the only thing contributing to these fingerprints, right? There's got to be more to the story.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, they found that just shuffling the words in a response didn't completely throw off the classifier.
Really?
Yeah, which means there's something more at play here than just vocabulary.
Intriguing. So if it's not just word choice, what else is contributing to these LLM fingerprints? And we've got to get to the bottom of this.
Well, that's exactly what the researchers did. They started looking beyond the words themselves and exploring another pretty fascinating aspect of LLM outputs, how they format their text.
Oh, you mean things like, bold text, headers, lists, all those little stylistic choices we make to, structure our writing. You're telling me that's part of an LLM's fingerprint too?
You bet. And it turns out these formatting choices are surprisingly unique to each LLM. They even achieved decent accuracy just by classifying LLMs based on Markdown alone.
No way. So how an LLM styles its text is part of its fingerprint. That's wild. Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me everything. What kind of stylistic differences did they find?
Well, for starters, they found that ChatGPT seems to love using bold text in lists for emphasis. Like it wants to make sure certain points really stand out,
Haha, yeah, it makes sense. ChatGPT always did strike me as a bit of a, drama queen.
Haha, exactly. While Claude, on the other hand, much simpler formatting style, rarely uses bold text or elaborate headings. It's all about clear, concise communication.
Oh yeah, that tracks. Claude's always been more of a minimalist, so it's like LLMs have their own fashion sense when it comes to Markdown. Who knew algorithms could be so stylish?
It's remarkable, isn't it? And it really suggests that these stylistic preferences are woven into the very fabric of how these LLMs generate text.
Okay, so we've got word choices, catchphrases, and Markdown fashion statements. But is this all just superficial? Or do these fingerprints run deeper into the very meaning of what these LLMs are saying?
That's the million-dollar question. And to answer it, the researchers, they had to dive into the realm of semantics. They wanted to see, are these idiosyncrasies purely lexical, based just on the surface level of the text? Or do they actually reflect a deeper understanding of meaning?
Okay, so how did they do that? Did they start giving these LLMs philosophical exams or something?
Not quite, but they did get pretty creative. They tried to trick the classifier, right? By messing with the semantics of the LLM outputs. So they rephrased responses, they translated them into different languages, they even went as far as summarizing them.
Wow, so they were basically playing semantic Jenga with these LLM outputs, trying to see if they could knock down the fingerprint by changing the meaning. Clever. Did it work?
Well, the results were fascinating. Even with all these semantic transformations, the classifier was still able to identify the original LLM with surprisingly high accuracy. Paraphrasing and translating barely made a dent.
Wow. So even when you play around with the words and the language, those fingerprints remain. That's incredible. But what about summarizing? Surely boiling a response down to its core meaning, that would make it much harder to tell which LLM it came from, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? And summarizing did lead to a bigger drop in accuracy, but it was still significantly above chance, which suggests that even the high-level semantic content, the gist of what's being said, that still contributes to an LLM's unique fingerprint.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but about how those words are used to convey meaning, to structure an argument, to tell a story. It's like each LLM develops its own, unique way of thinking and expressing itself.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And it raises a whole new set of questions about the nature of LLM learning and intelligence. Are these models simply mimicking human language, or are they developing their own internal representations of meaning and understanding?
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But we've only scratched the surface here, right? We need to dig deeper into these semantic fingerprints and what they reveal about the inner workings of LLMs.
That's exactly what we'll be doing in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be exploring those semantic patterns in more detail and discussing their implications for AI research, ethics, and the future of content creation. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts,
where we're, picking up our exploration of those fascinating LLM fingerprints.
Right. Last time we were talking about how each LLM seems to, develop its own kind of unique style, almost like a personality, right, that goes beyond just the words that it uses.
Exactly.
And we saw how they have their favorite phrases, their, preferred formatting quirks, even how the very first word they choose can be like a telltale sign of where they came from.
Yeah, it's like their opening line, their signature move.
Totally.
And we even started to touch on the whole semantics thing, hinting at how these idiosyncrasies might actually reflect, some deeper differences in the way that LLMs understand and represent meaning.
Yeah, and this is where things start to get really, really interesting, right? Because if these fingerprints aren't just superficial, if they're actually tied to how LLMs think, then understanding them could really unlock a whole new level of insight into how these models work.
Absolutely. It's like we're getting a glimpse into the minds of these AI systems, seeing how they process information, how they make decisions.
That's a great way to put it. So let's dive back into those semantic patterns for a bit. You mentioned that, even summarizing a response didn't completely erase the LLM's fingerprint. What does that tell us?
Well, it suggests that there's something about the way LLMs structure their thoughts, their arguments, their narratives, their whole approach to communication. That's unique to each model. Even when you boil a response down to just its core meaning, there's still a trace of that original LLM's way of thinking.
So it's not just about what they say, it's about how they say it.
Exactly. It's imagine you ask two different chefs to make the same dish, right? They might use the same ingredients, but the final product would taste different because of their individual techniques and styles.
I like that analogy. It makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually analyze these semantic patterns? It seems a lot more complex than just looking at word choices or formatting.
You're right. It does require a more nuanced approach. One technique that the researchers used was to actually employ another LLM, acting as a judge, you could say, to compare pairs of responses side by side.
Wait, they used an AI to analyze other AIs. That's pretty meta.
It is, but it's actually a very clever approach. Because LLMs are trained on such massive amounts of text, right? They're able to pick up on these subtle patterns and distinctions that might be really difficult for humans to detect.
That makes sense. So what did this LLM judge have to say about the different LLMs it analyzed? Did it notice any interesting stylistic differences?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most striking findings was the contrast between ChatGPT and Claude. The judge consistently noted that ChatGPT tended towards these more detailed and comprehensive explanations, often incorporating additional context or background information.
And Claude was more, focused on providing concise and direct answers, prioritizing clarity and efficiency over expansiveness. It's like we're back to those personality differences again.
Precisely. And these preferences were reflected not just in the content itself, but also in the way the responses were structured. ChatGPT often used more complex formatting with headings, lists, bold text, really trying to organize its thoughts.
Whereas Claude was more, simple and minimalist. Rely mostly on plain text and bullet points.
Exactly. It's almost as if each LLM has its own preferred way of presenting information, its own communication style.
Fascinating. It's making me wonder if these stylistic differences might stem from the types of data they were trained on. Maybe ChatGPT was exposed to more academic texts or encyclopedias, while Claude was trained on news articles or technical documentation,
That's a great hypothesis, and it's definitely something that researchers are actively investigating. Understanding how training data influences these idiosyncrasies could have huge implications for, how we develop and fine-tune LLMs in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got these stylistic differences, but how consistent are they? Do LLMs always exhibit the same patterns, or can they like adapt their style depending on the context?
That's a crucial question. And the researchers did find that while LLMs do have their like preferred styles, not completely rigid, they can actually adjust their approach depending on the specific prompt or task.
So it's not like they're just, stuck in their ways. They can be flexible.
Exactly. They're not like robots blindly following a set of rules. They're capable of adapting and responding to different situations.
Okay, that's reassuring. It means that as we, develop more sophisticated LLMs, we might be able to like fine-tune their stylistic preferences, almost like, training them to have better communication skills.
Absolutely. And this opens up some really exciting possibilities, for tailoring LLMs to specific domains or tasks. Imagine being able to like train an LLM to write in a particular style for, say, marketing materials, or to adopt a more formal tone for, legal documents.
Oh yeah, that would be incredibly useful. It's like having a team of specialized AI writers at your fingertips.
Right. But it also raises some, ethical considerations. If we can manipulate these stylistic fingerprints, we need to be mindful of potential misuse.
Oh, absolutely. We don't want to end up in a situation where like AI-generated content is being used to, deceive or manipulate people.
Exactly. As with any, powerful technology, responsible development and use are paramount.
Agreed.
But the potential benefits are vast, Understanding LLM idiosyncrasies could lead to breakthroughs in everything, from content creation to education to even scientific research.
It's amazing to think about all the possibilities, but let's not forget about, the elephant in the room here. What about the implications of these findings for detecting AI-generated content? Is this like the key to finally being able to tell whether something was written by a human or a machine?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's definitely something that researchers are actively exploring. If you can reliably identify these LLM fingerprints, it could have a profound impact on, how we approach authenticity and trust in the digital age.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine being able to verify the source of a news article or a social media post, or to authenticate like the authorship of a piece of creative writing.
The possibilities are endless, but of course there are challenges. LLMs are constantly evolving, right? And these fingerprints might change over time.
So it's not like a silver bullet solution.
Not quite, but it's a significant step forward. And as we learn more about these idiosyncrasies, we can develop, more sophisticated methods for detecting AI-generated content.
Okay, so we've got content detection, stylistic manipulation. What else? Are there any other like implications of these findings that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, there's one more area that I think is particularly important: bias. Remember how we talked about how these fingerprints might actually reflect the biases present in the training data?
Right. If an LLM is trained on text that, reflects certain stereotypes or prejudices, those biases could become embedded in its fingerprint and then be reflected in its outputs.
Exactly. And this is a huge concern, especially as LLMs are being used in more and more sensitive domains, right? Like healthcare, education, even law enforcement.
Because if we're not careful, these AI systems could like perpetuate and even amplify existing societal biases.
Precisely. That's why it's so crucial to develop methods for detecting and mitigating bias in LLMs. And understanding these idiosyncrasies is a critical step in that process.
So it's not just about making LLMs more, creative or efficient. It's about making them fairer and more equitable.
Absolutely. We need to ensure that these technologies are developed and used in a way that benefits all of humanity, not just a select few.
I couldn't agree more. This is all like incredibly thought-provoking. It's amazing how a seemingly simple question, like, can we identify which LLM wrote a piece of text, has led us down this like rabbit hole of fascinating discoveries and ethical consideration.
I know, right? And we're just getting started. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll wrap up our discussion of LLM idiosyncrasies and explore what the future holds for these, powerful and enigmatic AI systems.
Welcome back to AI Paper Podcast, everyone.
We're wrapping up our deep dive into the fascinating world of LLM idiosyncrasies.
Right, and we've covered a lot of ground in these past couple parts. We talked about how each LLM develops its own, unique fingerprint. How those fingerprints can be surprisingly resilient to things like, paraphrasing and translation, and even how they might reflect like deeper differences in the way LLMs understand and represent meaning.
Yeah, we've gone pretty deep.
We have.
And we also explored, some of the potential implications of these findings, everything from detecting AI-generated content to, mitigating bias in LLM outputs.
Right, and it's been a pretty wild ride, to be honest. This is all like mind-blowing stuff. It's like we're cracking the code of AI, getting a glimpse into how these complex systems actually learn and think.
It's definitely a game changer for the field of AI research, that's for sure. And it has the potential to, really revolutionize how we interact with and utilize these powerful technologies.
No doubt. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit, right? And think about the bigger picture. What do these LLM fingerprints tell us about the future of AI?
That's a great question. Well, for one thing, I think it really suggests that, AI is becoming more and more individualized, much like humans, right? Each LLM develops its own unique way of thinking and expressing itself.
Yeah, and that's pretty amazing when you really stop and think about it. We're creating machines that are not just intelligent, but also, individualistic.
It really is remarkable. It's a testament to the incredible complexity of these systems and the just vast amounts of data that they're trained on.
Absolutely. But it also, raises some interesting questions. If each LLM is unique, right? Does that mean we need to treat them differently? Do we need to develop different approaches for training and interacting with them?
That's a great point. And it's something that researchers are definitely starting to explore. It might be that we need to move away from this idea of a one-size-fits-all approach to AI development.
So instead of trying to create, a single super intelligent AI, we might actually need to focus on developing specialized LLMs for different tasks and domains.
Exactly. We might have LLMs that are, specifically designed for writing creative content, while others are, optimized for scientific research or legal analysis, for example.
Right, and that makes sense, right? Because different tasks require, different skills and approaches. Just like, we wouldn't expect a poet to be a great mathematician. We shouldn't expect a single LLM to excel at everything.
It's about finding the right tool for the job, right?
Right.
And understanding these LLM fingerprints can really help us do that.
Okay, so specialized AI, individualized training. What else? What are some other, predictions for the future based on these findings?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more research on how to manipulate and control these LLM idiosyncrasies. If we can really understand what causes these fingerprints, we might be able to intentionally shape them.
So we could potentially train LLMs to, write in specific styles or to adopt certain perspectives.
Exactly. Imagine being able to fine-tune an LLM to write Shakespeare or to generate code in a particular programming language.
Wow. That would be incredible. It would open up a whole new world of, possibilities for creative expression and technological innovation.
It really would. But of course, with great power comes great responsibility. We need to be very careful about how this technology is developed and used.
Right. We don't want to end up in a situation where LLMs are, being used to spread misinformation or to create harmful content.
Exactly. Ethical considerations need to be at the forefront of all AI development, always. But, I'm optimistic that we can, harness the power of these technologies for good.
Me too. I think these LLM fingerprints are really a sign that, AI is becoming more sophisticated, more nuanced. And that's a really exciting thing.
It certainly is. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for this, rapidly evolving field.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. I hope you all found it as, fascinating and thought-provoking as we did.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone.
And until next time, keep exploring the world of AI. And remember, every LLM has a story to tell.
And we'll be here to help you decipher it.
Bye for now.